Under students, Mr. Williams here talking you through our next subsection of section 14, the 90s. We're in general here talking about the mood of America. So the American psyche, our personality, the attitude from coast to coast, border to border throughout this era. Reflecting back on section 13, we've had a resurgence, a return to American exceptionalism, a return of patriotism being felt through many areas and many communities and many demographics in the US of A through the 1980s. Heck, we have a point after the Persian Gulf War where the approval rating for the sitting president is above 90%. Many Americans are feeling good about heading into this new decade. Although the 1990s start off with some political hiccups, some economic distress, okay? However, the tides quickly turn, and through the majority of the early to mid to late 90s, the vast majority of Americans feel good about living in this nation, feel good about what they're doing, feel good about things to come. That doesn't mean, though, that there's not some volatility, that there's not some disagreement, that there are not some changes and shifts taking place. For the most part, with economic content, with people feeling okay where they are financially, there's a decent degree of happiness existing across the nation. All right. Politically, though, with this contention, all right, with this overall happiness kind of allowing us to examine and or ridicule other areas of our life. Okay. So, for lack of a better term, with not having anything better to do, all right, with our time. Many Americans start to squabble politically. We start to become a more divided nation, politically speaking, through the 1990s. A lot of this could be rooted in the growing coverage of politics 24/7 in the media. A lot of it is also facilitated by the internet. But what becomes hyper-politicization through the aughts and the 20 teens, what we've really experienced, almost the return of tribalism in our national political forum, it's born in the 1990s, okay? We start to see individuals that make it out to be you're either this or that, right or wrong, left or right, black or white, okay? You either love the Clintons or you hate the Clintons. You're either conservative in your political ideology or you're very liberal in your political ideology. You're either for globalization and free trade internationally, or you are all about isolationism and protecting the United States by making sure you're focusing on just things internally. So America starts to become a more politically divided nation through the 1990s. Why? The media, okay? The internet, and in general, we don't have anything better to do. All right? We don't have anything better to do. Things are good enough in many other areas of our life where we can really start to, again, debate, critique, criticize, ridicule, squabble about political ideology. We also see a rise in the right. Now, the CNN video called The Rise of Terrorism is going to talk about the radical right. Understand that's way, way over there. And when we get into government class, one of the things we first introduce you to is the political ideological spectrum. All right, this idea that there is some type of linear diagram that describes whether you're right, left, middle, okay, the extremely oppressive versions of each of those political extremes. It's not so much a line as it is a circle, okay? When you get extremely to the left and to the right, you are actually more closer to each other than you are the center, or slightly right-leaning or slightly left-leaning. So in short, if you're a leftist anarchist, all right, you are very similar to a fascist radical right individual. You're more closely the same than you are the opposites, even though you would be on opposite ends of that linear spectrum. In the 1990s, we see a rise in the rhetoric from the right. So we're talking about very conservative values. There are some talk shows on TV and most notably on the radio on the radio where these issues are discussed. Issues like immigration, gay rights, the LGBTQ community. It's something that's 30 years in the making when talking about it daily throughout our national political discourse. And issues revolving around abortion. The right was angry over those issues, most notably in regards to government control or lack of government control regarding some of them. Okay, so the government stance, all right, on those major issues. The left responds to referring to the right as being racist, okay, or xenophobic, bigoted, and homophobic. All right, this idea that you can't be against abortion without being against women's rights at the same time. That you can't be for more stringent immigration policy without being a racist. So we end up getting into a lot of name calling, and the battle, again, spills over into TV as it, for the most part, originates in radio and the news press. Race is also a divisive issue in the 1990s, and it starts off early on, okay, and some enormous situations, most notably the LA riots of 1992. This is kind of piggybacked off of the Rodney King beating from earlier on in the decade. So we have a situation that is years in the making in Los Angeles, where for the most part, law enforcement officials that are white, historically speaking, the law enforcement departments, for the most part Caucasian, are not upholding, okay, the law in minority communities with the greatest degree of integrity. They're corrupt, they're nasty, and they're out to get some of those minorities, most notably African Americans, and some of those minority-dominated communities in the Los Angeles area. Rodney King is an individual that is beat by a racially charged situation by LA law enforcement officials. And for the most part, many of the individuals that were involved in that are acquitted. Okay? They're not found guilty of basically abusing their powers. What transpires after the Rodney King case are the LA riots of 1992, where effectively minority communities, the backlash against law enforcement officials policing those communities, the police basically said, we're not going to send anybody into those communities to do the policing then. And what transpires in the LA riots is just some fascinating stuff when it comes down to the level of looting, violence, outrage, property damage and vandalism, just astronomical stuff. You basically have anarchy on the streets in LA for days. As law enforcement says, we're not going in there. Just a ridiculous political situation playing out in Los Angeles that was obviously racially charged from improper governing, improper law enforcing for years in the LA community. A lot of this fuel is poured on the fire through the medium of music. Gangsta rap starts to scare white America. In the area of LA, not so much, but across the nation, further amplifying the problem and maybe some misunderstandings surrounding the issue, absolutely. Okay. This situation kind of has some suppression, but gets revved up once again with the O.J. Simpson trial in 1995. The Juice, who for a long time had been seen kind of as this friendly African-American figure for the masses to ingest during the 1970s, 80s, and early 90s, is charged with murdering his wife and her current romantic individual. Okay, the case against OJ is startling. However, some of the law enforcement individuals that were vested with the responsibility to investigate, to document, to bring charges against, they got a track record of not being pristine and or of high integrity to minority individuals. So the situation, in order for the OJ defense team to hopefully get him acquitted of charges, right? So he's not convicted of murder, acquitted, not convicted of murder. They play the race card. And phenomenally, the jury does not find beyond a reasonable doubt that OJ did commit those murders, and he is acquitted, okay? Not found guilty, all right? And this outrages the vast majority of white America, as the case, which played out in the public, almost seemed, extremely good that OJ did murder those individuals and should have been convicted. So we've got a certain level of racial tension now being discussed nationally from situations in Southern California. And there are some other situations from around the nation. Nothing like what was experienced in the late 60s, but still the coverage, the conversation, it's more upfront, all right, than it was in the past. And it's something that definitely defined some of the more volatile and or uncomfortable situations in the 90s for when, again, the vast majority of America living pretty contently, all right? Okay with how things are going on. But the world of politics, political ideology, the conversation, the discussion, the back and forth, okay? The drive to make everything a binary choice, that it is either left or right, yes or no, one or two, black or white, etc. That there was no gray area. That's born in this decade. And some of these situations that play out regarding race in our nation definitely fuel that push towards a binary decorum. We also start to see a certain level of Latino input into our national conversation and discussion on culture in the US of A. Okay? Immigration, both legal and illegal, begins to rise in the 1990s. Why? You're able to exit some of those nations with a greater ease due to the fall of the Soviet Union. Some of those nations where governments were relatively oppressive or extremely oppressive, and for the most part, financially, you could not live higher on the hog. So from the Caribbean, from Cuba, immigration numbers skyrocket. From Asia, they increase. From Mexico, they increase. And from Latin America and Mexico, they're only going to continue to increase through the aughts and the 20-teens. By 2007, Latinos replaced African Americans as the largest ethnic group in the United States of America. Okay, the United States of America is on a trajectory for, within the next few decades, to become a majority-minority nation, meaning Caucasians, whites, are not going to make up for the majority of the population, collectively speaking, in the US of A. So over half the nation is not going to be white. Okay, less than half the nation is going to be white. The majority of individuals will still be of white descent, Caucasian descent, all right, but not over 50%. So it's going to be majority minority nation. And some of the states in the Southwest are already seeing those demographics change accordingly. So African Americans are no longer the majority minority in the US of A by 2007. And a lot of this can be attributed to the legal and illegal immigration that was taking place through the 1990s. A lot of racial tension, a lot of political division. All of this is going to fuel this idea of political correctness. And I bring that up because we have some prominent figures here. At the top, Bill Maher. Below him, Dennis Miller. And below them, the team from The Daily Show in the mid to late 1990s. These are three prominent talk shows that are born in the 1990s that bring political discussion and political ideology into the form of pop culture, into the form of current attitudes and discussions that are taking place in the US of A. Bill Maher, fantastic at it, still to this day, making people feel uneasy and pissing people off on HBO with Real Time with Bill Maher. Believe it or not, in the 90s and into the very early 2000s, he was on ABC. His talk show aired after Nightline on ABC. Similar situation, similar setup to what he has now on HBO, but it was called Politically Incorrect with Bill Maher. Again, freedom of speech in the US of A. Bill Maher has the right to say anything and everything that he wants to say. You do not have to listen to it. However, I value such situations. I still watch it, even if I don't agree with it, because I want to be exposed to all sides of the story. Okay? Dennis Miller would have been the alternate side of Bill Maher. Miller historically leans to the right. Dennis Miller got his start with SNL, Saturday Night Live. He used to do the Weekend Update. He eventually gets his show on HBO, now the platform for Bill Maher, where he could, again, not be censored since it was cable paid for programming. But you got Bill Maher kind of leaning to the left, Dennis Miller kind of leaning to the right, and all those individuals offered a phenomenal forum to bring people on from all walks of life to discuss the current political and cultural issues facing the nation. The Daily Show did this on Comedy Central, originally hosted by Craig Kilborn, then spearheaded by Jon Stewart, who left prior to the 2016 election. And it's kind of disappointing because Jon Stewart, although he is liberal, he leans to the left, ultimately similar to Bill Maher, called it as he saw it. So you may not agree with this individual, and that's absolutely fine, okay? But we're entering into an era here, born in the 90s, finally having come of age through the aughts and the 2015s, where everything is very, very tribal, right? You can isolate yourself to only listen to and follow or be affirmed by people you agree with. You don't like somebody on Facebook or social media, you can block them or unfollow them. These shows in the 1990s were dominant when it came to socially and politically active Americans because they typically attempted to get across the entire spectrum, not just focus on one little niche, okay? Now, they want to celebrate and applaud individuals that do what they see as right, but they were always at least active and attempting to shed light on and or chastise what is wrong on each side of the spectrum or even in the middle. Daily Show did this to a phenomenal degree. Ratings used to be ridiculously high in an era that started to see the phasing out of Jay Leno, David Letterman, etc. You see the rise in the Daily Show with Jon Stewart after Craig Kilborn left to do late night television after David Letterman. But Jon Stewart, The Daily Show, Stephen Colbert, you can see pictured in there as well, Steve Carell, lots of prominent comedians, individuals that touch on social issues and political issues in today's world, but phenomenal stuff. Present day individuals that do that, I got Clay Travis up here. I'm a big Clay Travis fan. Dave Rubin, also a big Dave Rubin fan. They would be more moderate or centric individuals. They're going to be seen in the present day world as extreme right radicals, but they're not in the sense of when you actually listen to what they say. Joe Rogan would be another popular, I guess, figure, similar to the Bill Mahers and Dennis Millers and Jon Stewarts of yesteryear. And I got Sean King on there, bottom of the slide, as he would be more of a leftist liberal view in some of the political rhetoric and conversations that dominate social media and the internet today. Ben Shapiro, Steven Crowder, Jamel Hill, lots of those individuals would kind of fit into a similar mold as the Dennis Millers, the Bill Mahers, the Jon Stewarts, born in the 1990s, as there becomes a certain, again, benefit financially for the media to create an alternative program to discuss these cultural, political issues and ideologies in the 1990s. All right, it starts to become lucrative for them to do so. All righty, that does it for the mood of America in the 1990s. This subsection, for the most part, things are good. People are pretty content with their lives, how things are financially, how things are socially, how things are culturally. All right, how things are with their family. Okay, America is starting to dominate again to an additionally higher level coming out of the 1980s. Internationally speaking, people feel good about where they're at. That doesn't mean that there aren't some points of contention, some volatility, as we mentioned through these slides. We'll pick it up with the next subsection talking about pop culture, alternative America, the alt version of America. Alt rock makes its debut in this decade as well. Okay? That's all I got. See you later.